Welcome everybody to today's webinar. It's part 2 in a 3-part webinar series. Part 1 was bringing your spreadsheets to life, first steps with Squirrel 365. And the recording is available at the link on the left-hand side at the bottom, or the easier link to our events page will get you there as well. What I'll do for those maybe who didn't come last time, a quick recap on what we looked at. We looked at how you can use Squirrel to take your spreadsheets, bring them to life and see them as you've never seen before. And a couple of examples that we saw last time were this website conversion calculator, where you can slide how many visitors you have a month, what are the conversion to sales leads, and what's your lead rate to customers, and then the price point down here, as I had turned it before, and it gives you how many additional leads, additional leads, additional sales, and additional revenue. And you can see how that might be underpinned by an Excel spreadsheet calculating those numbers. Slightly more sophisticated is the revenue projection calculator, which sits on top of a SaaS revenue growth model, and we looked at that model in some detail last time, which has more inputs to it and is a fairly fully fledged financial projection model. And this is it turned into an interactive calculator using Squirrel, and we looked at how we connect up the sliders and the numeric input, and also how we change the colors on the KPIs to show when things are good or bad. Up the conversion rate, you'll see that year-on-year revenue goes from red to orange to green. So we looked at all of that last week, and we looked at how you can deliver those in PowerPoint, in email, in collaboration tools, and in website. Usually with just a single click, you can get the URL or the identifier to put it in PowerPoint, or share a link in email, or we saw how you put it in collaboration tools like Medium or Notion, and embed in websites like WordPress or any website really. So that's where we finished last time. So what we're going to do this time is dig a little deeper and do what we call adding an intelligent interface to your spreadsheet. So go beyond just sliders and numeric inputs to be able to do really some quite dynamic things in terms of interfacing to your spreadsheet. But as we'll see, it's all done through the spreadsheet itself, using a little bit of logic in the spreadsheet with no code whatsoever, all just point and click. So let's have a look at some of the examples and some of the techniques we're going to look at and how they look once you've implemented them, and then we'll go back into Squirrel and actually show you how you can do these. So here's a marketing calculator. It's got the same sort of slider capability we just saw there, same numeric capability, which is doing a calculation. It's a marketing calculator for a data backup provider, and it just says sort of like, given the amount of data, what's your estimated transfer time. But it's not just the amount of data you can change on here. There's a drop down here that allows you to say, well, am I saying it in megabytes or gigabytes? And you can see when it's megabytes, the transfer time is 23 seconds. But if I'm in gigabytes, it's 6 hours 21. So it's easier for me to specify my overall load. And then also it says which plan are you looking at. So if I'm on the super plan, it's 6 hours 21 for 715 gigabytes to transfer. On the standard plan, it would be over 6 days, and on the lightning plan, it would be 1 hour 35 minutes. So it's a nice way of doing this. And as I say, this goes beyond what we saw last week, because you've got this drop down, you've got this radio button, and we'll look at how you add those into this particular model in a minute. Then this AWS Lambda ballpark cost calculator goes a couple of steps further. So what you can do here is you can choose a region. So let's say Mumbai. Turn all those calculations so you can see the changes. If I go to Osaka, you see that number changes. I can change how much memory each of my functions takes. The sliders are just like the ones before. But I've got some checkboxes, so I can say I want to include the free tier or not include the free tier. I can show calculations, and this is very different, whereby I'm actually changing what's on the screen depending on what I select here. And I've also got a little help screen that tells me what each of my inputs here that I can turn on and off. And we'll be looking at all those techniques again as we go into Squirrel. Then you can go a step further than that. That's sort of little bits and pieces on the face of the project. But now what I can do is I can actually change completely. So I can go from a what if to a table, which is similar to turning on that calculation in the previous one. But here I can pop up and make overall changes to the project. So I can say, well, what color do I want? Actually, it's really reflected in the what if screen better. So if I go and say I want this to be deep sky blue, then that changes that. I can show these numbers in the background here. So I maybe want the numbers, maybe I don't. And so I've got a little dialog box and my settings I can pop up on top of my project. And here's one that I like. It's Timo Elliott, an ex-colleague of mine, used to use this at the beginning of his keynote presentations about how there's their PowerPoint overload. And what we've got here, and again, it's another technique we'll look at. We see this photo, the image in the bottom is changing depending on what's going on, to sort of just to emphasize what's happening. And we've got We can change things in the settings dialog. We can go from a male to a female, man to a woman there. And you can also do other things like, well, we can set the tolerance of how many slides people can bear in a day, change the colors, and things like that. We can even do things like this, and this is fairly tangential, a bit random, but it's my favorite one. Any of you who've seen me present before probably seen this. It's my favorite optical illusion. What it is a Squirrel project based on an Excel. It doesn't look much like an Excel spreadsheet, but it is. And here I've got that sort of pop-up screen that tells me all about it. And it says, believe it or not, these two squares are actually the same color. And it is impossible to tell that that's the case just by looking at it. They will always look different. So that one and that one are the same shade of gray. And you can sort of see that if I move, actually, let's start with a tile. If I move the tile down here, but it just looks like the tile's changing. It doesn't make it much better if it's there. I've got sort of, I can make it a curvy movement. It still just looks like the dot is changing as it goes. The closest you get here is that you put a strip in there, and you can see that that strip is pretty much the same color all the way down, but down here it matches this one, and down here, up here it matches this one. Anyway, bit of a digression. But again, this is all done with techniques that we'll look at today in terms of Squirrel. So how's this done? How are all these things done? So the next 20 minutes we will spend in the product showing how these techniques work and how you can weave this magic with your spreadsheet, as it says there, with clicks, not code. The first thing we're going to look at is that data calculator, the data transfer calculator. And so I've got a version of that it's basically using the techniques we saw in the first webinar, where I've got the sliders. So I come into the test mode for debug here. I've got the sliders and I can change in the numeric value, but I haven't got the drop down for the gigabytes or megabytes, and I don't have the plans in here. So we're going to add those as part of the demonstration now. So what we'll see underneath here is a spreadsheet model which already has these in here. So what I can do in the model, and this is again just an ordinary spreadsheet model that allows you to type in megabytes. You'll see that if I've only 300 megabytes, it transfers in 4 minutes. If I type GB for gigabytes in there, then that goes up to 2 days. And similarly, standard, the plan there, if I go into super like that, then that brings it down to 2 hours. So the spreadsheet is already configured such that having GB or MB in there and the plan names in there will calculate the right result. And everything here is fairly standard. This estimates the time. This just formats that time, takes the time in seconds and formats it as a days, hours, minutes. All this would work in Excel or Google Sheets. The auto select is just looking VLOOKUP to get the speed from the plan. So all very standard spreadsheet stuff. So what we're just going to link into that using components inside Squirrel. So the first component I'm going to use is a drop down. I'm going to put the drop down in there, and I'm going to actually match it up here. I'll make it the same width as that and line it up to the left. And what I'm going to say is I want where is where are the labels going to come from this? And it's going to be it's the megabytes and gigabytes. So I just take it from my spreadsheet. So there I've got them there. I'm going to choose one to be the default, choose the label. I'm going to choose megabytes to be the default. So there I've got my megabytes there. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to insert that label when it's chosen into that megabyte or gigabyte cell there. And that's all we need to do. So I've now got a drop down. If I come into preview here, we can see that it's 10 seconds for 300 megabytes, but 2 hours for the gigabyte. So that's now all wired in there. And then we want to then do the second one, which is the radio button, which is just another control in pretty much exactly the same way. I put that radio button down there. I want it horizontal to go across. I'm going to bind it to the plan names there. And actually I'm going to put that, yes, if I do 80 there, then it sort of spreads them out. So the icons, maybe 90 would be better. Again, I'm going to have a selected item on here and the selected label. I'm going to start with the standard plan, and I'm going to say for the data insertion, again, I'm going to take that label and I'm going to insert it into there. So we actually ought to follow the standards and color those yellow because they're the ones that are being written to by Squirrel components, just so we can keep track of that. And now I'm essentially, well, I'm not essentially, I am finished. So I can say megabytes or gigabytes, but I can also go on to my Lightning, Super and Standard and everything is as it was. So this is now starting to show how more than just sliders and numbers, I can actually start to put more sophisticated UI controls on here. If I come into debug, we'll see that as I move this, you say super, just insert super in there, lightning puts lightning in there, gigabytes, megabytes in there, and that's just changing those and then exercising the model as it existed before. So it really is a natural extension to the Excel Google Sheets spreadsheet as it was. We're just using Squirrel controls to choose options that were already available inside the spreadsheet. One thing that's good about this is you'll notice if I put a great in there, I get value because it isn't a type of plan. And so actually, but with this here, I can't do that. I've only got the choices that I've got here, so I can wrap it up and make it easier to use and make it more engaging. So that's the first step of adding an intelligent interface on top of a spreadsheet. So the second one that we're going to look into is some more techniques that we're going to add into this SaaS revenue growth model. Now, this is the cut down version of the one that you saw last week, just to give me some more space here. What I'm going to do is a couple of things I want to add. The first one is I want to be able to change the color of the chart. This takes us one step further than the previous example. The previous example had all the names, like, for example, gigabytes and megabytes and the names of the plans embedded in the spreadsheet. Now we're going to go beyond that and add things into the spreadsheet so that we can start to take control of the UI in a slightly different way. So I'm going to go into my app slide here. There are already some stuff with colors that are in here, but I'm going to say this is going to be chart color, and we're going to have a range of chart colors, so maybe red, blue, green, and silver. And I want to control those through a drop down. So I'm going to do exactly the same as I did before. I'm going to add the drop down in there and put those in there. Maybe put a default, which is going to be, let's say I'll default to silver. And then I'm going to take this value exactly as we did before, take the label, not the value, the label, and I'm going to write that into that cell there. I'm going to, again, to that yellow and maybe put that as silver. And then, so that's all wired up. That one, I just go to my chart, and in the chart, we select it there. I go to my data series, and then I'm going to bind the color, which was bound to this, to one of the, I think to that main, actually B18, it was bound to, yes, that main color there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to bind it now to that dynamic color here. And so what I've got is it's now silver, but if I come in here, I can change it using the drop down. So the drop down is now controlling the user interface, and that's how all the color changes we saw in the ones that I showed you in PowerPoint were working. So that's not really sort of standard logic in the spreadsheet. It's not controlling inputs to the spreadsheet model itself. It's actually now we're starting to add things that are actually controlling the UI specifically. But that's the beauty of Squirrel, is you can move from controlling your model to the UI using the same skills, just the formulas and things that you put and values you put into the spreadsheet. The second thing I'm going to do is to give the user the option to turn some of the user interface off, specifically these KPIs at the top here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another one. This is going to be a toggle switch, and then I'm going to actually, I tell you what, let me just to make it nicer, I'm going to add a chart. Let's shut for actually. Putting this down here is easier than retyping it. Chart color is there. I'll make it left, smaller. And then I will duplicate that down here by cutting and pasting. And what we're going to do is go KPIs as a label down here. So I'm going to bind that second one to there. So that's now going to control if I show KPIs. Maybe put that up there like that. Now, so what this is going to do is show KPIs is going to insert, this toggle is going to insert into there. So I'm going to take just on and off the default status is fine. I'm going to insert that into there. So now you see what happens when I come here. So now you see that's turning, when I click that, that just turns that on and off. So we're going to use that to drive the visibility of this KPI thing. Now I can set the visibility on a specific thing. So if I was to come in here, that would set it on this particular tile, but actually I want to set it on the container itself to turn it all off at once, which is a nice way. Often you want to manipulate many objects at the same time, and putting them in containers is a good way to do that. So I'm going to take this value here, and so I'm going to show this when the value is on. And actually, I'm going to make this, change that interactivity. The default value is going to be on here. And so what we've got, just with doing that and changing that visibility here, so I can come in here, and when I do that, it turns off the KPIs. So now I have the ability to turn off the KPIs. Maybe the user doesn't want them to turn off charts and tables, or actually have a toggle switch that shows a chart or a table. All the same techniques. All you're doing is controlling the visibility of an object based on a switch here. Now, one thing that we might want to do is actually, when we look at this, let's preview it here. This leaves sort of an odd white space up there. So you might also want to say, well, actually, when I turn those off, I want to move these up so that it doesn't have this strange white space. And actually being able to control the position of controls and components in the project on the canvas can be very useful. So what we're going to do here is say that, well, see, let's go down here. We're now going to have main position. So it's the main position of this. And so if it's up, if it's down rather, which it is here, then the top of this is 204. 204 in there. But now if let's turn off the KPIs in the designer just by use this one here. There we go. If I turn those off here, I don't need that anymore. If I do this here, if I move this up, so when the KPIs disappear, what I want to do is have it maybe up there. So it's at position 86. Its Y position is 86. So I'm going to say 86 in there, right? And I put that back to 204, turn these back on my default view. Now, what I want to do is I want a dynamic position. And this is just going to be a straightforward spreadsheet Excel formula. So if the show KPIs is equal to on, so I am showing them, then I want it in the down position. Otherwise, I want it in the up position, like that. So now I'm sort of going there, and actually I'll just put in there so that all the defaults are sensible. And so now what I can do is I can say this container here, which is the container for the charts and table, I can bind its Y position into this value here. So what will happen is if I come and preview this, then when I turn this off, not only does the KPI disappear, but all of this moves up. I turn it on, it moves down again. And that, again, is all done with that single formula in the spreadsheet. So I'm using the spreadsheet logic in order to be able to drive that that change in the UI. And so you have enormous flexibility to turn things on and turn things off and move them around as required by the end user, well, as required by the way in which the end user is going to be using this. And the final thing I want to show you here is similar, it's the same technique, but just applied a different way. I'm going to have another container up here, and this is going to be a pop-up. So we're going to put these controls here in a pop-up. The first thing I'm going to do is put a background in here, because the container is just a container. It has nothing in it. I'm going to fill that there with white, so that I have a background in here. Maybe put a label in here. I'm going to put this into the container there, and I put that label in there as well. Actually, I can pull that in there and pull that back. So there we got that. So this is a text label. Make it across here. I'm going to say this is settings, like that. Maybe make it a bit bigger and make it bold there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these here and just put them inside the container. They're now inside the container rather than the face of the canvas. And finally, I'm going to put another toggle on here, another toggle switch on here, and that's going to be a default of off, and it's going to insert its value into here. Again, I'm going to, if I go down there, I'm going to make that thing, and so settings. And what we do is we just say that container, that new container I've added here, its default visibility is the visibility is going to be controlled by that cell, and it's going to show when that is on. So now what I can do is I can preview this. If I turn on my settings, I can change the color of the chart. All of these still work, but now they're hidden away in a settings dialog, and that's exactly the technique that was used in driving the pop-up dialogues that you saw in the previous one. Now the final technique I'm going to show for adding dynamic UIs into spreadsheets is dynamic images. So it's that one there. So what I've got here is just 3 images from our website. And if I add an image component in here, you can get an image from a URL from a file. So I could upload these files, but I'm actually just going to use the this here. I have 3 of them like that. Then I can take the second one, and so the second one, and bind that in here, and the third one, and bind that in there. So I've got 3 icons there, and I might put these all together. So I'm going to make the same size, center them top and left like that. So there. And now what I'm going to do is use another component just to select between them and put a label-based menu on here. Make it horizontal, and I'm just going to say, do I want components, functions, or connections? And obviously components are the things that we've covered in the first 2 of these webinars. Connections and functions are something that we will cover in more detail in the 3rd webinar. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say selected, and from here is going to be inserted into, again, I'm going to use the label, insert it into here, make that yellow so I know that it's going there. And what I'm going to do is, so that just inserts the word components, functions, or connections into this cell here. And what I'm going to do is for the image, which is connections, I'm just going to say it's dynamic value, and when that equals word connections. And then if I turn that off and take this one instead, that's going to be functions. So when that equal to functions, and then the final one, I'll turn that off, and then the final one is components. So when that dynamic thing is equal to components there. So now if I run this, what we'll see is that this chooses between those because I've got functions, connections, components being put into this cell here, and then being able to do that there. There is actually a way in which we can do this with only 1 image, and if I get rid of these 2, what we can do, so that's dynamic with 3 images, but if you want to declutter your project, then what we can do is we can actually have the selected, again, that's just going to be one of these things put in there, but I'm going to have a URL here, which is going to be one of these URLs here, but I'm going to make it a formula, so that equals that. Then rather than functions, and I'm going to put that selected thing there and that. So that's now dynamic, and so that says components on there. So when I do that, you'll see that functions, components, and connections is the name of that. So what I now need to do is to wire up that URL, and then, oh no, I know what I've done. It's case sensitive. Image URLs, URLs in general are case sensitive, so I can just say, take that as lower there. Now if I bind that to here, that should be better. Then as we hit debug, then when we click on the various menu items, it changes the URL down here, which feeds into the image, which changes what is displayed. So 1 image, just with a changing URL rather than having the 3 and hiding them through dynamic visibility. There are the various techniques. If you have Squirrel, you can go and test these out yourselves. If you don't have Squirrel, you can sign up for a free account, and you can. There's also a number of these are available on the showcase page, and where you can download the Squirrel files for it. And if you would like to join us for the 3rd part of this, where, as I say, we're going to explore more about functions and connections inside Squirrel. But as I said in the first one, if you want to take the things we learned in the first webinar and just put a nice front end on your spreadsheet, that is a very appropriate use of Squirrel, and many people just do that. You can use the techniques we saw here today to extend that to put a proper UI onto your spreadsheet. As I say, in the next one, we'll be looking at really how you can go to the next level with connections and functions in part 3. Okay, well, that was today adding an intelligent user interface to your spreadsheets. I hope you enjoyed it. Many thanks for attending, and hopefully we'll see you on the 3rd webinar in a few weeks' time. Thank you very much.